Cliffe Knechtle, welcome to the next generation.
Elliot,
Thank you so much.
appreciate it. Great to have you.
I grew up in Brighton in the UK, which is the most atheist place in Britain. So religion growing up, it wasn't even an open inquiry, it was a closed book. As I've gone through my childhood, I've become more and more fascinated in what I think is the biggest question to answer: the existence of God. I've explored your content, I've explored Alex O'Connor's, I've read the Bible, the Gospels, I've gone to church, and more than ever in my life, I feel this desperation for God to exist. I've been out in America for 3 months speaking to some of the biggest Christian commentators in the world, and I always enjoy their company more than someone that doesn't believe. I look at the trees that have been blossoming in spring now on the East Coast differently. I look at the lucky moments I've had traveling and avoiding danger or death, and I want there to be a God. Yet simultaneously, I feel this pull in the opposite direction where I think all of it's made up. I think it's annoying. I think there are so many performative Christians that pester me, so many Muslims that get me to try and engage with their God. And it frustrates me so much. So I guess my first question for both of you is, why do I feel such an intense pull in two directions simultaneously at the moment?
Well, I think every sociological study I've seen is we're all born with this type of knowledge that there is a God, or at least there's something greater than us that we're prone to worship. So that's part of the pull. The other spot that you're talking about is a fleshly desire, is what the Bible talks about. And that fleshly desire is, hey, look, any man who's knocking on the door of a brothel is truly looking for God if they're an atheist. And my atheist friends really don't like when I say that, but I believe there's some level of truth in it, where we are going through a door looking for pleasure, not wanting there to be a God, want something to stimulate our nerve endings, but we know that that dopamine kick only lasts for so long. And so for a big part of me, yes, I don't want there to be a God because I want to live especially my own lustful way. And so for 20-year-olds, there's a reason why whenever we talk about lust, it goes viral. Because 18 to 34 and beyond, I mean, even my 85-year-old friends, you're going to deal with lust until the end. And so I think that pulls us away from God because it's a desire to live my own way. And one guy said to me once that, hey, Stuart, I don't want to give over my identity to somebody or something else. Why would I ever want to do that? So I think the identity piece is another one.
It used to be the case that I didn't want there to be a God that existed. I selfishly wanted to be the ruler of my own world. I wanted to build my own empire because that felt more rewarding to me, rather than my life being imposed on me by a God and my purpose. That didn't sit right as a 13, 14, 15-year-old. Now, I can't think of anything more meaningful than building God's kingdom on earth and serving something greater than myself, serving the creator of the universe. But I still can't get over this hurdle of faith. I've engaged in apologetics. I feel like I've reached the roadblock that everyone gets to with apologetics, where you know that ultimately it just depends on whether everything was true or not. But I'm still not there. So I wonder what it is. Do you think there's anything else that could be making me resist God and coming to Jesus?
I think it's important that you and I figure out what's the best explanation for life as we experience it. And I think the fact that you have such a strong drive to understand meaning and purpose is probably God knocking on your door, saying, come on, Elliot, I created you with a real drive to understand meaning and purpose. And you, as a sharp thinker, understand that if there is no God, life is ultimately meaningless, purposeless, and therefore, please wake up and smell the coffee. I'm real, I'm here, and I've left this powerful piece of evidence deep within your soul, deep within your being, that you long for meaning. And you're sharp enough to realize that if there is no God, life is a cosmic crapshoot. And if there is a God, then it's possible that there is meaning. And so that's what Jesus pointed out. And so I think the challenge, Elliot, for all of us is to figure out what is the best explanation for life, for reality, as we experience it. And I think God is the best explanation for life as we all experience it, if we think deeply enough.
How do we know that that longing for God isn't another fleshly desire? Just like you'd put hunger down to, or maybe an abundance, gluttony, or something like a sexual drive to knock at the brothel's door. Why is that separate to a hunger for God? Could that not be some sort of embedded fleshly desire too, but it's one for purpose that's maybe more noble, but not detached from the fleshliness?
Well, C.S. Lewis answered that question brilliantly when he said, if there is hunger that you have, then most likely there's food. If you have a sexual desire, then most likely there's a sexual act that you want to be fulfilled. If we have a desire for God and ultimate meaning and purpose that's objective, it's subjective, you don't need a God, but it's objective, you need a God, then there probably is a God. If he lands on this one, if there is a longing for eternity, something past the grave, then most likely, if that's true, throughout the world, the consensus of, then there probably is something beyond the grave.
And you don't think it could be evolved just for the sake of keeping societies together and having belief in something to keep us going?
Our search for truth, we couldn't have gotten here to this discussion simply from evolution.
Why not?
Because truth is outside of evolution. Nothing about truth is connected to the survival of the fittest.
Tell me more.
So survival of the fittest is simply the strong eat the weak. And how am I going to preserve myself more? But then all of a sudden, the drive for something to be true and not error is something that's outside of that evolutionary drive. You know, you go further and say something like free will is just a misfiring according to evolution. Something like objective morality, misfiring, but kind of helps us maybe. You look at consciousness, obviously something that's beyond evolution. But that drive for truth is a very new argument put out by somebody called Alvin Plantinga, who's one of the most renowned philosophers today. And I haven't seen anybody push back against that, any atheist. I've seen agreement, and they'll land on, truth doesn't make sense the striving for truth doesn't make sense from an evolutionary perspective.
Yeah, I love Plantinga's argument against naturalism. And I think it makes a lot of sense. I would agree with it too. The fact that atheism, or at least naturalism, kind of undercuts itself. I don't think that necessarily means that it's not true as far as we can perceive truth. It's more about our perception. The fact that as humans, we would be evolved to detect the world in certain ways that's not necessarily a true representation of what's actually going on, but it makes us survive. That doesn't mean that there's no truth out there in the universe, that there's not an actual kind of gravitational field that keeps us planted on Earth. It just means that our perception could be slightly skewed of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, sure, but then you have to deal with, okay, is there objective truth out there, or is it all subjective? And then you also have to go with Tom Nagel, one of the top philosophers around today, that's just an hour away from here. And he's an atheist, but he says, I realize that my naturalism has all kinds of holes in it when it comes to something like consciousness. And he says consciousness, which is outside of the physical and the material, is probably the biggest argument against naturalism that he and his colleagues have no answer to. And so, it's another form of a bullet that's just striking through, I think, the philosophy of naturalism.
Well, this conversation gets back to what you said earlier about faith. I hope it's becoming real clear, Elliot, that all three of us around this table have faith. So the idea that somebody doesn't have faith, if they're just into science or just into logic, is a joke. We all have a worldview. We all have a belief system that none of us can prove is true. So we all have faith. So the real difference is the object of our faith. Obviously, Stuart's object of his faith and Cliffe's, my object for my faith, is Jesus Christ, is God. And I don't know what the object of your faith is, but you have an object that you have put your faith in. So we need to be honest that we all have faith. So then the next question becomes, what's the evidence that whatever the object of your faith is, what's the evidence that that is reliable? And I would argue that the evidence points to God's existence and to the reliability of Christ being far more reliable than any of the other options.
Yeah, I feel like apologetics serves its purpose of getting you to a point where you realize that no one's irrational, even in the religious space or the atheist space, if they've thoroughly examined all possible options on the table. But it doesn't do the satisfying thing of converting you like that. I've engaged as much as a 20-year-old can who knows nothing about the world so far in a lot of apologetics and worked closely with Alex O'Connor and seen you guys give countless arguments against different theodicies. And it's all so fascinating, but it doesn't feel like the true conversion for anyone happens with this left brain approach to the world, where you get a syllogism for God's existence and then you're convinced. In fact, it doesn't really feel like you even choose to get convinced at all. Something kind of falls into your lap, maybe, that flicks some sort of lever in your brain or in your heart for you guys, or soul, that gets you to take that leap of faith. And I don't feel like that lever's been flipped anywhere in me yet. And I don't quite know what it is that would make it flip. And maybe that's okay.
I think you brought up the divorce rate in London earlier, and it's like flipping a coin because it's 50%. I think you have some level of desire for the love of parents to remain. Well, that's something immaterial. As an atheist, you'd have to go home to your girlfriend and you'd have to say, hey, my neurons are firing a certain way. My oxytocin, my cuddle chemical is basically saying, hey, let's cuddle on the couch, but I don't truly love you. As an immaterial idea, that's just mumbo jumbo. But I think, no, there's something out there. It's immaterial and you can't get a pound of love physically. And so the immaterial exists, and that's connected to the immaterial God, I would say. And so when it comes to things like parents, the most painful psychological thing that a child can go through is the divorce of parents. There's nothing more painful than that. And a lot of kids live for the love from their parents. And when they don't feel the love, the parents, for each other, then oftentimes they think they did something wrong and they reject themselves. Okay, you're finding your parents ultimately worthy in some sense, because kids worship their parents in a way. And parents oftentimes worship their kids. And when you have a breakdown relationally, and especially a physical death, well, then all of a sudden your life goes to pieces. And so to say you don't have some philosophy of life, to say that you don't have some type of faith and worship, which is worthship, finding ultimately something worthy, to say that, I can't get on board with that. I don't think that's true. And I think it's well beyond something like, oh, it's a tribal form of evolution and we just need that type of nurturing. No, I think we all know, if we're honest with ourselves, it's something much greater.
I don't know that. And I want to be convinced. I genuinely do. And I think before, at the start of the podcast, at the inception of it, speaking to Glenn Scrivener for the first time from Speak Life, I would have maybe been curious, but I wouldn't have felt on a different level the desperational drive I have now. I've experienced more of the world. I've gone through my own struggles. I've seen people die. And I just can't imagine living like this without a greater purpose for 20 more years. I don't know how that's sustainable in my life, frankly, especially with all the temptations that come in the media world and the shortcuts you can take that build your own empire, your own kingdom, but don't help others. They just masquerade as assisting the world altruistically. I don't think my worldview is sustainable, but I don't think that makes it untrue. It could just be that the nature of humans is flawed, like you guys would agree, and that we need something untrue to keep us going. And, the Russian philosopher Vladimir Solovyov quips that man evolved from apes, therefore we must love one another, and how ridiculous that sounds. And Glenn Scrivener put this to me when we spoke for the first time. And I'm just sat here thinking now, like, yeah, maybe that's true. It's horrible to stomach, but maybe it is. Like, could you guys stomach the idea of a universe void of any meaning, of true love? It is just fizzing chemical reactions. Would you guys have any evidence that would get you to actually hold that world belief? Or do you think you would have something blocking you deconverting from Christianity?
When you look at the experience of life, there's no way that I can conclude that we can discover love under a microscope. Can't take, there's no x-ray of love. And yet I would argue that that's a very real part of my experience. And if you extract love from my experience, that is going to be a major hit on life. And so you asked earlier, what would be the switch that would flip me? I think the switch that can flip you is love. When you begin to realize that there's a God at the center of the universe who really loves you, you don't have to believe that blindly. All you have to do is look at your life. You know that it's love and relationships that make your life go round and round. It's not just intellectual postulates or theories or ideas. No, we're gregarious, relational beings. And if there is no God, love is just a chemical reaction. Well, I'm sorry, my experience is there's a lot more to love than a chemical reaction, and you cannot X-ray love. It's impossible. And so I think love is probably the strongest piece of evidence that there's more to reality than just matter and energy, than just intellectual postulates. There's a personal being who created us as persons. I mean, just look at AI. I think AI is scary for many people. It's not scary for me. It's technology. It's the Industrial Revolution carried on to the nth degree. And yet, there's more to life than just industry. There's more to life than machines. Yes, there are chemicals in my brain and there are chemicals in your brains. If you do a lobotomy on me, you'll change my behavior. But there's so much more than just the matter, the energy, the chemical balance or imbalance in our brains. There's a soul. There's a person with a free will, with the ability to genuinely care. And I hate to tell you, but a machine cannot love. A machine does not experience joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. AI can't experience that. That empathy of AI is not human compassion. Yes, it can emulate empathy. No, it takes a human being, a person. Well, you just push that back to the beginning, and you've got to believe that either there's a impersonal it from which we come, or there's a personal being from whom we come who actually loves us. And when you begin to look at Jesus Christ and read the Gospels, it becomes real clear. Yeah, the evidence is Christ is reliable when he talks about the God who is at the center of the universe being a God of love.
Well, and those machines, too, they are getting way more creative, and they are being built in a fashion that's pretty impressive. But at what point can you say, I'm going to pull the plug on that machine? You could say it at any old time. Steven Pinker recently said, yeah, even if there's a level of consciousness, it's still a machine. And he was pressed on that. He said, well, but they're getting very close to being like human beings. So why can you pull the plug on the AI robot and not pull the plug on the human being? Let's say there's a level of consciousness in this robot. Pull the plug. And if there's no created in the image of God, if there's no objective value within a human being, then you can't say don't pull the plug on a human being. And so we bump up every single time with atheists and others into this weird idea of objective value. And from the atheist worldview, even with your friend, I didn't hear any type of convincing argument. Actually, to the contrary, every atheist that I know wants to jump out of that argument very quickly, whether people have objective value or not. And if so, where does that come from if it's not coming from God?
If there is no God, the universe cares about you just as much as it cares about an oyster. Period.
I'm willing to jump into that argument. And I recently had a debate with Lila Rose around abortion. And I'm about as pro-life you can get for a pro-choicer. I understand that everything logically breaks down to people being humans at conception. And if you try and obfuscate, then you're just being ascientific. And that it's a bad thing. You could probably call it murder if you really want to, if you want to be pedantic. But that still didn't answer my question of why I, as an atheist, should be against abortion if it's the best thing for the human beings involved. Because I don't have this idea of sacred. I don't have this idea of the sanctity of life, of being made in the image of God, the Imago Dei. I just have a bunch of human beings interacting and hopefully being guided towards flourishing. And that's kind of my metric of success in the world, is us moving towards flourishing in some way. It means that I can hold this weird position where I kind of think that abortion should be avoided at all costs. Yet, if it somehow does benefit the mother to get rid of that baby, I would be on board to do so. And this is a really horrible position to hold. Because
Why?
you guys have heard me say, I think that it is a human being. I don't buy into a clump of cells that kind of obfuscates and detaches any meaning towards the baby. I get the meaning of it, but the leap is, if it's made in the image of God, of course I'd be against abortion, but I don't have a God.
Right.
So I feel like I can't truly ground anything. I act as though we're all made in the image of God, and I see you guys probably the same way a Christian would. I don't perceive you differently. I'm not sat here thinking about tribes running around and survival of the fittest and planning how I can kill you guys and steal all your resources. I just don't think that is how we're wired psychologically as humans. But I can't ground anything objectively, and that really bothers me.
Well, you said it. Nothing's sacred. Well, if nothing's sacred, everything's a joke. And if everything's a joke, there's nothing worth dying for, that's for sure. But then if there's nothing worth dying for, then there's nothing worth living for. So try and live that out.
And the human flourishing one, are you basically just saying your experience of what human flourishing looks like, based off of that experience, you want to respect me for your experience of it? Like what exactly? Because that's what I hear typically from that perspective on that worldview. It's I want to be treated a certain way, and I have these different categories of how you need to be compassionate and empathetic towards me, and I will reflect that then back onto you. Well, who says according to who, and how do you know I want that, and how do you know that there's truly flourishing within that?
Well, here we go. And you guys can pin me down on this as much as you want. Call me a dumb 20-year-old paradox.
No, you're not that. Don't worry.
No, you're not that.
I hate subjectivism. I think it's so stupid. The fact that people think just because they have their personal truth, it equates to an actual truth. That's dumb. I'm not a subjectivist. Alex O'Connor's ethical emotivism is something closer to what I would subscribe to. And I'm sure that's literally just because I've consumed so much of his content. So I'm aware of that. The way I see it, though, detached from that, is it is an objective fact that people experience subjectively good or bad things. So your good might be different to my good. Your bad might be different to my bad. But the objective fact remains that you experience good and bad, pleasure and pain. I want a world where we're stripped of as much pain as possible and we're guided towards pleasure. I would describe pleasure over long periods of time, and pleasure is maybe too casual of a word, but nonetheless, pleasure over a long period of time as flourishing, being genuinely full of meaning and fulfillment. That is human flourishing, a society where we try to get rid of as much pain as possible. That will look different to everyone. And that's what makes it so tough. That's why I think a unifying doctrine makes it easier to do. But that's kind of what I get my grounding in my ethics from, is I don't want to see you guys in pain. I want to see you guys in pleasure. And maybe if you really drill down to the philosophical bedrock, it's something selfish. It's not altruistic. But I also do know that I would die for a bunch of things. I would do what's not convenient for me in service of the greater good, as far as I can call it good. So I'm kind of stuck on whether everything I want is selfish or whether there is room for altruism in my framework of the world.
See, it comes down to faith, doesn't it? You're talking about pleasure. Well, who defines pleasure? Who are you going to trust to define pleasure? Because according to Christ, real pleasure is in loving God and in loving people. According to Christ, real pleasure is learning what the purpose of your life is, why God put you on this planet, and then living it out. According to Christ, real pleasure is having hope for the future, that there indeed is life after death. Real pleasure comes in sacrificing for another person. Now, we live in a culture that says, no. Real pleasure is physical comfort. Real pleasure is having enough money to do whatever you really want to do with it. Real pleasure is going through orgasm 2.2 times a week. Real pleasure is not getting sick, right? Not having cancer. In other words, real pleasure is a physical, material thing. And according to Christ, no, that's hollow and bankrupt. According to Christ, real satisfaction doesn't come from a drug high or from promiscuous sex or from a large stock portfolio. Real joy and real pleasure comes from relationship with God and relationship with others. Real pleasure comes in giving your life, not in getting. That's why Jesus says it's more blessed to give than it is to receive. Well, that is because it leads to real pleasure. Why? Because that's why God created us. That's the purpose for our lives. So I'm either going to trust Christ because I think the evidence is he's more reliable, he's more in touch with reality, or I'm going to trust myself, which is profoundly influenced by my culture, and I'm going to reduce pleasure to a physical feeling.
Hey, sorry for the brief interruption. Many of you will know from this video and others that Christianity has been a subject of fascination for me for quite a while now. As someone who isn't a Christian myself, I'm seeing more and more how Christianity has shaped the modern world, and trying to understand ourselves or the world without getting to grips with it seems silly when there's a key piece in the puzzle missing. That's where 321 comes in. It's an online course that gives you an introduction to Christianity, assuming no prior knowledge. It's presented by Glenn Scrivener, who's been on the show twice for extended episodes and is one of my favorite communicators and YouTubers in the world. I end up binging his content a lot of the time, and there's just something about the way he speaks that means I've got way more random knowledge of Christianity from binging his videos than I would have thought. Anyways, the 8 video-led sessions are based around super beautiful animated stories that more than anything just get you thinking. I've done it. And if you're investigating these things like I am, you can check it out for free by going to 321course.com/nextgen. You just enter your email, enter your password, and you're in. No spam and no fees. That's 321course.com/nextgen. And now, back to Cliff and Stuart. How do you guys square this stance on focusing on Jesus with this hatred for the individualism that's emerged over the last few years, when what may be more convenient would be these mass gatherings, these societies, these communities that are religious, like Christianity? I mean, you guys are Christians, but you put the emphasis on what would Jesus do. It feels like this modern individualistic take on life has kind of spawned and emerged from Protestantism and focusing more on worshipping Jesus in your own way.
No, quite the opposite. Time magazine did a full edition dedicated to the reason why Americans have gone towards just having one child instead of 3 not too long ago, is because atheists, secularists are saying there's no ultimate purpose to have children.
But rewinding further than that to the Reformation.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I don't know the history. It's interesting you bring up individualism. I've always understood from what I've read that Christians have been very pro-communal. Obviously, individuals, maybe what you're referring to in the sense of the rights of the individual, but the Christian faith has always been so prone to large communities, like you say, and Christians obviously were the first ones to welcome in slaves, saying that children even have equal value that women do. So all these categories, I think, created, yes, rights for the individual, value for the individual, but then also this great growth for any and everybody. And that was considered very strange, despicable even by every other society I know of from back then.
There's a very good type of biblical individualism, defined as the value of the individual. And it led to a lot of great advances in Western civilization, in African civilization, in Chinese civilization. It is now the value of the individual. Human rights. I think we're really committed to human rights in our country. Well, why are human rights so important? Because of human worth, human dignity. The individual has innate value, worth, and dignity. But not if there is no God. If there is no God, our number came up in a Monte Carlo game where cosmic accidents, and the value of the individual is up for grabs. You know, you're valuable if your stock portfolio is large enough, and you're valuable, Elliot, because you're a handsome guy and you're articulate, so that's why you're valuable. Don't lose those handsome looks, though. That'd be horrible, because then you become trash. So there's a good type of individualism that says the individual is valuable because they're created in the image of God, because God loves us so much, he wants us to spend eternity with him in heaven, and he's given us gifts. So there's a good type of individualism. But then there's a narcissistic, self-absorbed type of individualism that says life is all about me. And come on, Elliot, you know how horrible that is. It's called pride, and C.S. Lewis did a tremendous job blasting out of the water in his chapter on the great sin in mere Christianity. Pride is essentially competitive. I'm going to beat you. I'm going to steal your girlfriend from you, not because I like her, because I want to prove to you that I'm a superior guy to you. That's horrendous. That is really horrendous. And so, yes, Jesus says you've got to learn to die to that sinful nature, that egotism, that narcissistic tendency, that self-absorption. And if you think about it, he's right. Do you enjoy a relationship with a proud, stuck-up narcissist? I doubt it. I sure don't. But I enjoy relationships with people who are humble, who are thoughtful, who are kind. You know, we've talked about Alex O'Connor. What a very wonderful guy. He's an atheist, but he still has a conscience. He still has a rational mind that's very sharp, obviously. He's brilliant. And yet I would argue the way he treats people comes right out of a biblical worldview, a biblical faith. It does not come out of an atheistic faith.
How so? Tell me more about that.
Well, Nietzsche. It gets right down to, why are you valuable? Why are human rights so important to you? Oh, come on, quit the stuff. Quit the, well, you know, the church has perverted this and Christianity's perverted that. Well, forget that. We agree, that's horrendous. Look at Jesus Christ. Look at what the Bible teaches. The individual is valuable because we're created in the image of God. Now, you can't get away from the fact that if we're not created in the image of God, if we are cosmic accidents, I mean, it's real simple. If my birth is an accident, my death is an accident, it follows that the only thing that lies between those two accidents is another accident, my life. I mean, go to a graveyard. There's the guy's name, birth date, death date. What's between the two dates? A dash. That's all life is. It's a dash from one hospital, the hospital I'm born in, to the hospital I die in. It's ultimately meaningless. And yet Jesus Christ says, no, it's not ultimately meaningless. You were created by God and to love people. And guess what? If you don't love God and if you don't love people, that's evil.
I think Alex O'Connor's the perfect subject for this discussion, as he's obviously spent years working out his ethical framework and investigating a bunch of different beliefs. What makes you say specifically that the way he treats people and is able to show up in such a nice way is biblical? What do you think's going on in his brain?
I think he's a human being. I don't think Alex O'Connor's a dog. I don't think he's a lion. I don't think he's an amoeba or a slug. I think he's a human being created in the image of God, which means he has a rational mind, he has a conscience, he has a free will, he's aware, he's conscious, he can see things, he can observe, he has experiences, and he knows that kind of kindness and goodness in treating people is far preferable to being mean and self-absorbed and narcissistic.
So you saying he has a biblical approach towards the world is more of an ontological claim, I guess, to what he is rather than a psychological one of what he's thinking about. You don't think that he's culturally pulling on the strings of Christianity?
The way he treats people is right logical from a worldview that says, in the beginning, God. It is not logical if you're coming from a perspective that says, in the beginning, hydrogen.
So is Alex O'Connor illogical?
Don't call him that on a...
I confronted him with that, and he did not appreciate it. But yeah, he's being inconsistent. He's too kind. He should instead be saying, well, it's all relative. So today, if I'm kind, great. But if tomorrow I'm unkind, there's nothing wrong with that. It just is. See, Elliot, if there is no God, if atheism is true, then what is. And as soon as we start saying, this is good and this is evil, this is better, this is worse, this is just, this is unjust, we're out of atheism, we're out of relativism, we're right smack back dab into, no, there are objective morals, and you better wake up and smell the coffee. You better stop treating that person in an unjust, racist, sexist way. You better learn to respect them as a human being. Well, why respect a human being? I mean, you step on slugs, you step on bugs. Why don't you step on people? Because you know there's a difference.
Do you think that lacks an element of faith in human nature, even just separate towards the teachings of Jesus? That actually, if you didn't believe in Jesus, you would still treat people with dignity because you have the feelings in your body that arise to treat someone with respect. Like I would with you guys, even though I don't believe in a God. Maybe you're taking a bit of a cynical approach towards human nature here.
No, one group of apes on the North Shore and another group of apes on the South Shore, they owe each other nothing. And one is not going to just be kind just to be kind to the other group on the other shore. In many ways, He's being selfish if he's welcoming that group in who could wreak havoc on his own group. And it's back to your initial question of an atheist. Do they have a hidden motive? Or is it okay for them to be free riders? I would say it's totally fine for them to be free riders. I would say to this point my dad was kind of going the theistic route. I'll go more the Christian route. Everything is Christian, what Alex O'Connor is doing. It's not Greek. It's not Roman. It's not Egyptian. It's not Mesopotamian. I mean, sure, the golden rule, yes, he could have gotten from something outside of Christianity. He definitely did not get the values of sacrifice as well as putting another before yourself to the point of even dying for that other person. No, it's all Christian. And that's why I respect Nietzsche. That's why I respect Camus, Sartre, Dostoevsky, and others, but especially Nietzsche, who said, no, what are you doing? As an atheist, you should not be compassionate. You shouldn't be empathetic. You shouldn't be living for others. Definitely shouldn't be sacrificing for others. Why is he wrong? I don't understand. Nietzsche, Freud, probably the top two most influential people on our culture. And yet Christianity is, fortunately, the worldview that comprehensively has taken over our culture. So I just have never heard every single atheist, just like the objective value, I hear just run from those writers and authors as quickly as they possibly can. Am I wrong on that?
I think I'm at an age uniquely to anyone else who's studying this in their 30s or 40s, in that I'm allowed to say I don't know anything because I'm 20, whereas other people might be stubborn and they'd feel pressure to have a stance. So I'm just like, look, all options are on the table right now. And I wouldn't run from Nietzsche just because I haven't read all of his stuff yet. And maybe once I have, then I will run away from him, and I probably will. But for now, I'm kind of in this phase, and I think it's useful for the audience to see where I'm willing to ask any question. Whether it is, well, do we have human worth or should we all kill each other? I'm pursuing the truth, and that's kind of my North Star with this podcast. So I wouldn't say I would run from these people. Would I feel a knee-jerk reaction of despising them and their worldviews? Yes.
But when you say I'm searching for the truth, that's a tremendous faith statement. It's implying that truth exists. It's implying that there is reality. It's implying that we're not just a bad dream you're having here, Elliot.
A very good dream.
It's implying that you have the wherewithal to separate fact from fiction, truth from falsehood. Wow. If your brain is simply a highly developed monkey's brain, why would you trust your brain? Do you trust the thoughts of a monkey? I doubt it. So you have a profound faith in reason, and that's good. Not only that, yeah, there's lots you don't know. Well, guess what? I'm a lot older than you, and there's a boatload that I don't know, probably more than you don't know. All right, I'm not very educated. There's a bunch I don't know. But that can be an excuse that we use to run away from the facts. And the facts are, Elliot, all three of us put our heads on a pillow tonight. And like it or not, we're not agnostics. Like it or not, we have a worldview, a belief system. Like it or not, we have to answer the question, is human life valuable or not? Like it or not, we have to answer the question, is there a purpose to my life or not? Like it or not, we have to answer the question, how am I going to live my life ethically? And like it or not, we're going to have to go to funerals, be it grandma, grandpa, mom, and dad, or friend or whoever, and we're going to have to ask the question, is there life after death or not? And we're going to have answers to all those questions. So we can be agnostic about what kind of food do you like best, or what kind of restaurant is your favorite, or what type of economic system do you prefer? Are you a communist, socialist, capitalist? I'm agnostic. I really don't know. Because you don't have to do that. But you have to. You have no choice. Either value a life or not. Either say there's a purpose and meaning to life or not. Either I can cheat the IRS and not pay my taxes, or I got to be honest. And then you got to face death. Is there life after death or not? And you just can't say, I don't know. Because life forces you to make a decision. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. It makes me think of my favorite C.S. Lewis quote, and people watching that have watched other episodes can take off their bingo card because I love it. But it shows how difficult it is for me to hold the worldview that I currently hold. And C.S. Lewis says, supposing there was no intelligence behind the universe, no creative mind, in that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. It's merely the case that when the atoms inside my skull happen, for physical or chemical reasons, to arrange themselves in a particular way, that as a byproduct gives me the sensation I call thought. But if so, how can I trust my own thoughts to be true? It's like upsetting a jug of water and hoping the way it splashes arranges itself in a map of London. And I'm like, that's so true.
And Einstein didn't put it as articulately as C.S. Lewis did, but he still makes a point that I like a lot, which is the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. I like that.
I don't know where I go from here. I feel like I'm walking, carrying a few gallons of water, and I'm either going to have to stop and put them down or get over some finish line somewhere. But I don't know where that finish line is. And I do fear not making the leap of faith towards Jesus and towards Christianity. And we can talk about why that would be the religion of choice, but that's what it would be for me. I fear going through this world and going through a media career and shaking hands and rubbing shoulders with all these people and getting captivated by the fame, the money, the status. That terrifies me because I know that the people that I despise are the ones that fall prey to those temptations. And the ones that I love are the believers. The last 3 months I've been touring the US from West Coast to East, and the people I've enjoyed spending the most time with has been all of my Christian friends, because you get to sit at a table and ignore the cameras and the lights if it's a podcast and focus on the important questions. Whereas there is this kind of stench that people give off, especially in the modern world of influencers. And you can kind of tell just by looking in their eyes that they're not here for the conversation. They're thinking about how to get a clip of you, how to get more followers, how to use you, who you know that they could benefit from. And I hate it. There's nothing I despise more. And there's nothing I love more than sitting down for a dinner with a bunch of humans that are there present in the moment. They've put their devices in the other room and they're connected to each other and disconnected from the internet. So I fear what happens if I don't make some kind of conversion. I don't feel a pressure from anyone to, because I'm enough of a contrarian not to. I'm like the 97th percentile of disagreeableness. So if there's 100 people in a room, I'll disagree more often than 97 of them. So I genuinely don't feel a pressure other than an internal one, out of fear.
I think Houston Smith put it well in the best-selling book on world religions when he said, the two most influential people who've ever graced this planet are Jesus Christ and Buddha. And Jesus is a ways ahead of Buddha. And they were the only ones who people have stopped and not just asked who you are, but what are you? What you are. And Buddha immediately said, whoa, what I am, I'm not a god. I'm not the ultimate principle of truth. That's not me. And Jesus Christ welcomed it and said, I am God. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And so I like that you're obviously contending with the most influential character who's ever graced this planet, who, oh, by the way, the book that was written on him has been the bestseller every single week worldwide since its inception almost 2,000 years ago. I think if you're not contending with Jesus Christ and the Bible, you're making a gigantic, gigantic mistake.
I also think you're really blessed to have met those kind of Christians, because I think we all know around this table that there are a lot of hypocrites. And I'm glad we still use that word to describe certain people who say one thing and live another. So you've been really blessed to meet some genuine Christians, genuine followers of Christ, it sounds like to me, what you've just described. But here's the challenge. The challenge is even those genuine Christians are tempted. Even those genuine Christians blow it. I certainly have. I like to say this, and I have to explain it often. I am a dirty, rotten sinner because too many people think, oh, you're a minister, or a pastor, and therefore you're somewhere up here. No, I'm not somewhere up here. The Apostle Paul talked about himself as being the chief of sinners. Because you understand, sin is not just murder, it's hating. So, what I like to get to point out how people really are is 1 Corinthians 13, which talks about love. And Jesus says, yeah, I created you to love God and love others. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It is not rude. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Keeps going. Love never fails. Now, I've got to replace that word love with Cliffe. And that'll help you understand what I mean when I say, I am a dirty, rotten sinner. Cliffe is patient. Cliffe is kind. Cliffe does not envy. Cliffe does not boast. Cliffe is not proud. Cliffe is not self-seeking. Cliffe is not easily angered. Cliffe keeps no record of wrongs. Oops. Cliffe always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Cliffe never fails. That's wrong. I am a dirty, rotten sinner. And then when you begin to understand that God loves me so much that he sent his son Christ to die on a cross for my sin, that in spite of the way I really am, he offers me forgiveness and loves me, then all of a sudden, the lights begin to go on.
You know, I can't even begin to fathom what it's like seeing the world through a Christian lens properly, being truly convicted in your faith. And I know that faith wanes and wavers and people have more and less faith depending on different aspects of their lives. But an exercise that really helped me empathize with Christians, which isn't very common. You guys are usually slated and put down because you are up on your moral high horses and think you're all perfect and you have this objective truth. Well, screw you guys.
Yeah.
It lends itself to more blame and more accusations being thrown your way. But what I really was impacted by was imagining walking down the high street in my hometown and seeing a group of 8 15-year-olds. They're bunking off school for the day because they didn't want to go to their maths lesson with that teacher that they hate. And they're out drinking vodka at 3 p.m. instead of attending their education. They're screwing up their life possibilities. They're about to go and smoke some weed in the park and then go back and have sex with each other at one of their friends' houses. To me, that's unfortunate. And I'd go as far as saying it's a travesty. But for the Christian, it's more than that. It's people that are potentially walking down a path that will guide them towards not being let into the kingdom of heaven, and one that guides them towards hell. When you bring in these eternal concepts, it adds a lot more weight to the way you see the world. And I don't even know how I would be able to stomach looking at those adolescents doing wrong in the street if I was a Christian with that belief. It must weigh on you. And I can then see how you guys can go out and have the energy to preach on the streets every day and get into debates because it's urgent and it's bigger than just the moment now. It's larger than life. It's an eternal spiritual battle. That must weigh on you greatly. How often do you think about people in the world in that way?
But it forces you to think about yourself first. A Christian, every single time they look at somebody else screwing up, they should look at themselves 10 times because you have to remove the plank from your own eye before trying to help somebody else with their own planks and their own sins. And so when I look at somebody screwing up, I hope I'm going to have the humility to say, oh man, what areas am I screwing up in terms of my thought life, in terms of my actions, motives, reasons that I should not have for doing certain things, acting like I'm good and religious when really I'm trying to get something from somebody. And so I don't look at kids screwing up like that and say, how horrendous, let me go about with my savior project to save them. No, I hope I look at myself first and try and figure out, all right, how can I live better? We were talking yesterday about how can we serve the poor better, the starving better. I've been with kids who are literally starving to death. Well, why am I not giving more money away to them? That's more horrendous than the kids having sex in the street. I can tell you that much. So looking at ourselves is the crucial one, and thinking through that's a Christian perspective on life like that. But you're right. Like C.S. Lewis talks about, when it comes to hell, it starts with a grumbling mood. And what hell is that grumbling mood taken on throughout eternity, where eventually you lose even the understanding of that I am grumbling, and you lose your very self.
Mm.
And so I think that even small matters like that have eternal consequences. And that's why I love Christian Smith out of Notre Dame, who's one of the top sociologists today in our country, says we are losing an understanding of what a dirty, rotten sinner is. And that, even if you don't believe in God or Scripture, is tremendously endangering for our society, because we're all born self-righteous. We all think we're doing the right thing. We all think we got the right political perspective. We all think that Charlie Kirk should burn in hell and that he deserved to get shot despite having little children. And that's just your perspective on things based off of your own political thoughts. And so don't tell me I'm a dirty, rotten sinner for having that perspective. That's just my perspective. And I'm going to come up with my own moral, subjective values.
Mm.
And so don't tell me my truth is wrong. Just focus on your own truth. So you lose the understanding of objective sin and that we're all broken. Well, then I'm not going to be able to look at you and say, no, I'm wrong too. I could be wrong on this perspective. I'm going to take a humble approach. You could be wrong. Now let's not scream over each other, but actually have a healthy discussion.
Mm.
We all have faith, we talked about earlier, and this is a classic example of it. The Death of Satan, Why America Has Lost Its Sense of Evil by Alan Del Banco, professor at Columbia University in New York City, is basically a statement. If you lose your sense of sin, you've got to explain human behavior. And when it comes to evil, or what you think is evil, if there is no God, you're kicked back into biology, psychology, and sociology. So biology says you're an aggressive person who wants to survive. So that's why you do evil, what we as a society would call evil. Or you're repressing your emotions. That's the psychological approach. And that's why you do, quote, evil, unquote. Or you're just economically deprived. You're locked into poverty. So that's why you do evil. But if you think about that and look at your experience of life, you begin to realize, although those are three faith positions, it's not good faith because the evidence does not support that. That's an incredibly hollow, insufficient view of evil. And that is why this issue of sin that Stuart was just talking about is one of the key pieces of evidence that the Bible is reliable, that God does exist, and that the Bible's analysis of the human dilemma is spot on. That we do have a sin problem, meaning by that we have a soul, meaning by that we have a will, meaning that we have some mixed up motives and desires. And that is why the solution to sin is connected to God, who created us in his image, who created us to live for a purpose, who created us not to pervert the good gifts he's given us, which is sin, perversion of the good gifts he's given us. So sin is not very creative. It's just taking the good gifts that God has given us and twisting them and perverting them and using them for a horrendous outcome. So we all have faith. The question is, what's the most accurate definition of life as we experience it?
Let me talk to you about Jamie AI. Jamie doesn't just show you what did well. It analyzes every section and questions retention so you can see precisely where listeners lean in, where they drift, and where they drop off. It learns from your entire back catalogue and uses that history to inform how you structure the next episode. Instead of guessing what to research, you get data-backed input for your prep. Themes that consistently hold attention and questions your audience actually stays for. For upcoming guests or topics, Jamie will watch up to 200 videos on them or their domain and combine that with their social media, interviews, and internet sentiment to surface the deepest, most interesting lines of questioning nobody else is taking. Jamie AI identifies your most effective formats, openings, and segment structures so you can repeat what reliably works and discard what doesn't. When you're cutting clips, Jamie already knows which moments are most likely to work based on real retention spikes from your audience, not intuition or guesswork. The best part is you don't have to live inside analytics dashboards. Jamie turns complex performance data into plain language takeaways and specific recommendations you can act on based on your actual data. It supports the full creative loop from planning to post-production, from research briefs and run-of-show outlines to segment ideas informed by how your audience has actually behaved. The result is simple. Smarter episodes, less guesswork, and a tighter feedback loop between what you publish and what your audience actually cares about. If you want to build that kind of intelligence into your process, go to jamieai.com and use code Elliot to get 20% off. That's jamieai.com and use code Elliot, ELLIOT, at checkout to get 20% off. Do you guys think you live too comfortable of a life? I think about this a lot now with the podcast. I genuinely want to help others because I know, even just selfishly, that if I lived a life in pursuit of my own desires and fulfilling them on a short-term or long-term basis, it's pointless. It doesn't do it for me. And with that, I look at when I am spending time with my girlfriend and we're watching a movie and I'm having a great time watching it, but I could be out doing another podcast or trying to help someone who hasn't been privy to the fortunate conversations I've been able to have. My mind's always racing, feeling guilty for the time I'm spending just enjoying my own life. How do you guys approach that? Do you think about the house you live in and that it should be smaller, the free time you have should be less, the food you eat should be cheaper?
We categorize it and we make sure that there is a pyramid. And that, like St. Augustine talked about, St. Augustine said, as soon as God does not become number one anymore, then you make gods of any and everything on this planet. And many people make gods of their families, their spouses, their girlfriends, their boyfriends, their jobs. And they slowly shrivel up and put too much pressure on those things. And that becomes unhealthy. So I think for us, healthy devotional life, for us thanking God almost every minute of the day in some kind of way, how you're acting or thinking or singing or talking about him, and then focusing on your kids. And then work comes, and work is a great thing. The Christian perspective is the only worldview that says the God who created everything was actually in the dirt himself working. Work was considered for the slaves and for the demigods back in that time period. So no, it's all good. It's so interesting you just said that, though, because that's my biggest guilt as well in life. And when you have kids, you're going to get even more guilty. Sorry, Elliot. So no, I honestly think the Bible makes it pretty clear. And St. Augustine said that, where if you follow that pyramid, life's going to go well. And that's why God laid it out the way he did.
The answer to your question is yes, I do live too comfortable a life. No question about it. And so therefore, the existential struggle that I go through regularly is, why do I keep as much for myself as I do, and why don't I give more away? Now, what brings a bit of balance to that thinking is two things. First of all, so do something about it, Cliff. Be more generous. And so I want to grow in generosity. And generosity is such fun. It's amazing. And then also, I've got to learn to appreciate what I can experience that's good. Sex is not dirty. It's a gift from God. It's perverted when it's experienced outside of the context of commitment. Money is not bad. It represents the work that we've done, and that's good. And we need to be able to provide for ourselves and our families. But to turn it, as Stuart put, into an idol, no, don't do that. It's a horrible idol. It leads to the trivialization of life and people and yourself. It's scary. So live a wise life, Christ, which is what Christ calls us to do, to enjoy money, to enjoy possessions, but then to insist upon being very, very generous. And I need to grow in generosity.
What do you think we've missed from this conversation?
What's the switch that you want to see flipped in order for you to become a follower of Christ? What do you think that switch is?
I don't know. I certainly don't think it's an intellectual one. I feel like I've come as far as I can in examining all the most popular arguments and theodicies and all the apologetical great debates. And it doesn't lend itself to atheism. That's a conclusion I've come to. Certainly not agnosticism. But I still don't feel that conviction to go, yeah, I follow Jesus. I feel like maybe it will just keep on getting pushed further and further. I'll go, yeah, but I need to read the Quran first as well. Yeah, but I need to go and spend 3 months in China in a rural village to make sure I've examined all the different world beliefs. I think that's the limiting factor for me, is attaching myself to a particular world belief, and from there knowing how quickly it can spiral into a dogmatic belief in it. And maybe that's a half truth. Maybe I will be more convicted once I say I am a Christian, but I still will be open to other perspectives. I'm just cognizant of the way my brain works and the way I've seen other people's brains work, in that as soon as you attach identity and you speak words into existence, I guess, you block yourself off, at least partially, from examining with a more objective lens, I think.
Well, have you ever tried to meet Christ? Have you ever cried out? You talked about the beauty in the very beginning of this podcast, the beauty of this world. Well, the NASA astronauts just got back, and they all said, we got very religious up there. And especially one of them, he said, if you guys don't think you're in a spaceship flying through outer space on Earth, then you're nuts. You guys are in the real spaceship. And he said, with the beauty all around us, and with the stillness and quietness up there and the creativity, he said, it's impossible not to believe that there's a God. And he's a strong Christian. But at the very least, theism becomes incredibly tantalizing. But I think it lands on that experiential side for you. You've done all the intellectual arguments, you said. You've done all the hoops and you've gone through that. I don't think there's any intellectual argument that, especially you being a very smart Brit, is going to satisfy your soul and your mind. I think it'll come through the experience and just putting your hands up and saying, hey, God, if you exist, please show yourself to me. And if you do so, I think eventually God will. Now, is he going to show up like Richard Dawkins wants him to show up? Written in the skies, Richard, here, I believe the stars aligning perfectly. But then he comes back the next year and he says, actually, I can naturalize that. And are you going to hold God to that? Or are you going to hold Alex O'Connor when I drove him to the train station? So I asked this very question and he said, revelation. I need a revelation. And I asked, okay, well, cool. What kind of revelation? I don't know. Matt Dillahunty said the same thing to me. I don't know, but I need a revelation. Well, if you don't know, how do you not know that you're not getting a revelation right now? I mean, you have to at least define it. Is it lightning striking right here, right now? God, if you do so, I'll believe in you. But no, obviously Jesus is not going to give you some type of power play in order to come to you and have a trusting relationship with you. He's the God of the universe who wants a loving relationship with you. He doesn't just want to show off his power, so all of a sudden you get a revelation and, hey, wow, he exists. No, that's obviously not the narrative. So I think just opening yourself up and asking God, do you exist? Reading the Gospels. Is Jesus attractive enough? His claims, his character, his resurrection, is that enough for me to truly believe in him or not? And then lastly, I'd get in a community of believers and I'd say, hey, guys, press me a little bit, but I want to see what the experience is like for you guys. I want to see, are you more joyful when you go through suffering? I want to see, are you more kind when you go through pressure? I want to see what your character is like on a day in and day out. And you kind of brought this up earlier. So I think being in that community also will give you an understanding of what that experience is truly like.
I want us to end on this because I have called out and cried out and I have prayed. For the first time, I felt really uncomfortable doing it before. It felt like I was kind of doing a magic trick, hoping to trick myself into something. I felt very uncomfortable, even going to church and seeing others pray. I still feel that, to be honest. I went to a Catholic church with some friends the other week, and I'm sure you guys will be a big fan of that. And I heard everyone saying their prayers together, and it felt very almost demonic, the intonation and this shared murmur. I was like, oh, this is just what you do if you're trying to trick a bunch of people into believing in a load of codswallop, in a flying spaghetti monster, in a celestial dictator. But now I've gone to a point where I'm like, well, what are you scared of? Why don't you pray? If it's all a load of BS, just try it. It might be entertaining at least. And I think when I look back on me as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old not praying in private, it was just fear. And I feel like I'm over that hurdle, yet I'm not over the faith one. So let's end on this. What success rate do you think humans' prayers have to God?
Well, if 35% of atheists pray when they're in trouble, I think there's automatically a guttural response that human beings have. We desire the transcendent when we really are in trouble, even if we don't believe in the transcendent. There's something guttural within us that's just going to do it. Where does that come from? Is that just from evolution somehow, a type of misfiring? I don't know. I think it might be a little stronger than that. And in terms of the percentages, it depends on what you think an answered prayer is. Like, let's say you're praying for your girlfriend, Lauren, right? That she's going to be your wife. And she doesn't turn out to be your wife. And you end up getting another woman who's your wife. Well, are you glad that that prayer was unanswered for you that you were praying that Lauren would actually be my wife? Yes, you'd be glad. And so is that a successful prayer? Well, in one sense, yes. In one sense, no. And so when God answers with no, not at this time, slow, I'm going to slowly answer your prayers, but maybe in ways you don't understand. And then go, it's boom. He's saying go for something. Here comes a prayer that I think is pretty clear. I think that's how he answers our prayer. No, slow, and go. But in terms of trying to put it into a box of what is a success rate, well, then you have to define what is prayer, because prayer is not putting God in a little box and treating him as a little pygmy God or as a little bellboy to fetch my bags. It's instead, no, I'm going to turn my will over to you because I know your will is good and you're not my little secretary. You're the God of the universe, so I'm going to worship you. And so when it comes to prayer, for me, my wife just had a serious health crisis. I mean, she went blind for 48 hours.
Hmm.
And was I asking God in Jesus' name, literally going to bed and waking up, praying that? It was so strong. Yes. But was I also thanking God and praising God for sparing her life?
Hmm.
That we still have beautiful kids, that we're still breathing? Absolutely. And so prayer is not just for me to try and get things from God. Instead, it's to praise him for who he is and what he's doing, even in the midst of suffering.
I think you gave a very good answer to your question earlier on in our discussion when you pointed out that you have been exposed to Christians who sat around the table, put their phones outside, and were not concerned about who you could tie them into as a good contact. Instead, they really wanted to get to know you. Well, unfortunately, the majority of people don't understand prayer. You have articulated what prayer is. It's really getting to know God. It's not using God or trying to manipulate God to get what I want. Rather, it's an experiment in intimacy where I seek to get to know God, get to praise him for who he is, thank him for all that he's given me, get rid of my entitlement, get rid of my self-absorption, get rid of my desire to be in control. I've got to control everything. Get rid of my selfishness. And I learn to be lost in wonder, in adoration, in awe, in praise of who God is and all that he's given me. And that's why you asked a very American question, a very Western question, which is, well, what about the success rate? What's the percentage? But you answered that question beautifully when you pointed out, it's the people, the Christians who I've been exposed to who sat around the table and were interested in me, not in who I could help them make contact with and help them get ahead in life. Those are the people who really impressed me. And that is exactly what prayer is. It's not an attempt to get. It's a desire to get to know God better.
Do we have time for one quick question?
Mm-hmm.
I look at something like the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami, killed 250,000 people across the Indian Ocean. It feels to me like those people didn't have their prayers answered. And that lowers the success rate of prayers quite a bit. I don't think any of them would have prayed to experience something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not God. I don't know why he allowed that. Could the devil have had a hand in it? Certainly. Secondly, could God be waking people up through a tsunami? Or you go earlier back even in Britain to one of their big earthquakes. Was that the 1800s, 1900s? That also caused many people to ask the question, and many people turned away from God when that tragedy struck. 9/11, it was the big one for us. A lot of people are saying that's God's judgment on New York City. And it finally came. I don't think we know that, and that's a dangerous game to play. Thirdly, I think we always see a ripple effect in suffering. Look, we're pastors, therapists, counselors. We so frequently see goodness come from suffering. It's scary. We so frequently see when you give somebody scripture, tears start to flow, and all of a sudden they have purpose even within their suffering. So that ripple effect of people oftentimes get closer to God within their suffering, or their suffering itself, other people say, whoa, I want that. Why are they handling suffering so well? The problem really becomes, though, when I do occasionally see those people, and I'm sure many of the families who had to deal with the suffering during that tsunami, where it does seem like gratuitous. And when I see that, I say, why, God? I don't see, at least right now, any goodness coming from it. But at the very least, we know that God sent his only son to die for us. And he died for us in the worst, most painful way imaginable, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. Then at the very least, we know he still loves us. And I think that's the greatest answer to the tsunami and painful suffering issue. I think an atheist has to throw their hands up and say, oh, kind of like one famous atheist in Britain. What's her name? She has the dyed hair. She debated Jordan Peterson a few times. I had a conversation with her once, and she basically just said, yeah, when I face suffering, I say, then man, this stinks, but get up and get on with it, girl. And she said, that's the atheist perspective on suffering. I said, are you really going to face that? In the face of a tsunami, that's really what you're going to say? Get up and get on with it? Or Hinduism says you did something wrong, or Buddhism says it's an illusion. I think all of those fall so short in the face of a tsunami. So there's a reason why Christianity is called the suffering religion. And it's always been called that because it makes the most sense of suffering, because there's a suffering savior at the very heart of it.
Cliffe and Stuart Knechtle, thank you so much for your time. You were going to say something else. I know we're running out of time.
All right. I don't know why God allowed suffering. But I do know that if a little kid from Haiti who's starving were to walk through that door there, if that little kid from Haiti who's starving to death were to look you, Stuart, and me in the face and say, this ain't fair. Look at you guys, how much you have. Look how little I have. That he'd be speaking the truth. We do have a tremendous amount compared to him. So to try and say, well, God, you didn't give him enough, that's a little difficult. He's born into an unfair world. And for us to think that we're entitled to what we have, what a joke. I didn't do anything before I was born to deserve being born in the United States, or that kid's born in Haiti. So life is unfair. Very unfair. Why? Because God created it that way? No, but because we human beings rebelled against God, and there are consequences. And there are consequences to the decisions that my parents made, that your parents made, that the people in our countries made, and there are consequences to the decisions that that little child from Haiti's parents, government officials, police have made that have far-reaching effects. And the Bible insists that when we human beings told God to get lost, he stepped back and unfairness and chaos ripped out. Now, it seems to me that the best answer to the problem of suffering is the cross of Christ. Evil is real. It's not just an illusion. What is baloney. Evil is real. Forgiveness is real, number 2. He dies on a cross to forgive us and to give us eternal life, to reconcile us to a holy God. And then thirdly, 3 days later, he rises from the dead. And so we have the ultimate solution for suffering. Eternal life in a heaven where there will be no more suffering, no more evil, no more death. Now, the alternative to that is despair. If there is no God, there's no ultimate solution to suffering and death. There is, you become fertilizer. How kind it was of Jesus to say, no, there's coming a day of judgment, and there will be a heaven. There will be a hell. There will be a time when justice and compassion win, and when life is ultimately affirmed.
Cliffe and Stuart, thanks for coming on the show. You've got your new book coming out, Demolishing Doubt. Where can people find it?
Thank you, Elliot. So I am Amazon or wherever you buy a book. You can pre-order. It comes out May 19th. So appreciate it, man.
Here we go. Make sure to like the video, subscribe, 5-star on all audio platforms, and we'll see you in the next episode.